I moved into that neighborhood in November 2018 because it sat less than 10 minutes from the hospital where I worked night shifts. Plano felt clean and quiet, built for people who slept at normal hours. Wide streets, new sidewalks, trimmed lawns that still smelled like sod. The houses looked similar, gray stone fronts, pale brick, garages facing the street. Everything felt open and exposed, which I liked after years of older apartments with dark hallways and tight corners. My schedule kept me out of sync with the rest of the block. I left for work as porch lights came on. I came home when the sky lightened and sprinklers started ticking on. Most mornings, the street was empty except for one thing that never changed. At exactly 5:30 a.m., my neighbor washed his sedan. The car was parked in the driveway every time, angled perfectly, front tires straight. It was a newer model, silver, no visible dents, always clean even before he touched it. He never used soap, no bucket, just a hose. Water ran over the hood, down the windshield, pooled at the curb, then drained away. He moved slowly, methodical, starting at the roof and working down. The process took the same amount of time every day. When he finished, he shut off the water, coiled the hose with care, and stood for a moment before going inside. I noticed because I passed his house every morning. I noticed because repetition stands out when everything else shifts. At first, it felt like a harmless routine. Some people run. Some people smoke. Some people wash cars that do not need washing. The weather turned cold in December. North Texas cold, sharp and sudden. Frost on windshields, thin ice on lawns. He kept washing the car. No gloves, sleeves rolled up. Water soaked into his clothes and darkened them. Steam lifted off the hood and wrapped around his arms. His hands turned red, then pale. He did not hurry. I told myself he worked odd hours too, that he liked the quiet before sunrise, that it was none of my business. I never saw him any other time. No lights on at night, no coming or going during the day, no packages on the porch, just that one window of activity locked to the clock. I started checking the time without thinking. 5:27 when I turned onto the street. 5:29 when I parked. By the time I reached my door, the water was already running next door. I never saw him turn it on. He was simply there, as if he had been waiting. I avoided looking directly at him, not from fear but habit. Nurses learn how to give people space. Still, I noticed details. His posture never changed. His gaze stayed on the car, not the street. His movements stayed smooth, practiced. The sedan never moved position. No dirt ever came off it. One morning in late January, my shift ended early. A patient transfer freed up staff, and I was sent home before 5. The sky was still dark when I turned onto my street. Porch lights glowed faintly. No sprinklers, no movement. As I pulled in, I saw water already spreading across the driveway next door. He was there. The time on my dashboard read 4:46 a.m. He stood at the same angle, hose in hand, water running over the roof. His clothes were already soaked through, clinging to him. The temperature hovered near freezing. I felt it through the windshield. My breath fogged the glass. The routine was not tied to daylight. It was not tied to my arrival. It was tied to something else. I parked and stepped out. The air cut at my face. The sound of running water felt too loud. As I walked toward my door, I passed the edge of his driveway. I kept my eyes forward. That was when he leaned slightly toward me and whispered my full name. Not a nickname, not a shortened version. My full name, first and last, pronounced correctly. I did not stop walking. My body moved on instinct, key in hand, step steady. My heart hammered so hard it made my ears ring. I unlocked my door and went inside. I locked it. I leaned against it until my breathing slowed. He did not follow. The water kept running. I did not sleep that morning. I sat on my couch, lights off, watching the street through the blinds. At 5:30, nothing changed. He kept washing the car as if the moment had not mattered. The explanation mattered more than fear. Fear passes. Questions linger. I ran through every possible way he could know my name. I had not introduced myself. I had not spoken to neighbors. My mailbox showed only my last name in small print. My car registration listed my name, but license plates do not show that information to the public. My work badge stayed on a retractable clip face down when I walked. My scrubs showed no identifying marks. I called the non-emergency police line later that day. I reported the incident without embellishment. Patrol car drove by that evening. The house next door stayed dark. Over the next week, I paid attention. The car remained spotless. The washing continued. The whisper did not repeat. That made it worse. A single moment meant intent. I started digging quietly. Property records showed the house was owned by a man in his late 40s. No family listed. Employment history led to a private security firm based in Dallas. Surveillance contracts, background checks, skip tracing. Before that, a short stint as a records clerk for a medical billing company. That detail caught my attention. Hospitals bleed data. Names pass through too many hands. Addresses tie to billing records. Shift schedules get printed and left on desks. I remembered signing in at a shared terminal during a system outage weeks earlier. My full name had been visible on the screen. I remembered a man in plain clothes working near the billing office that night. Badge clipped low, face forgettable. I requested a meeting with hospital administration. I described the situation carefully. They confirmed a contractor had been on site during that period. His name matched my neighbor. The pieces fit without anything unreal. He recognized me from work. He found my address through public records tied to my name. He learned my schedule by watching. The car washing served a purpose. It placed him outside at the same time every morning, giving him control of the space. It let him observe without moving. The lack of soap kept the process going longer, kept him exposed, visible, constant. The water sound masked other noise. The cold did not matter to him. Routine mattered. The whisper was not a threat. It was a test. Proof that he could reach into my private life without stepping forward. I filed a formal complaint with the hospital. They terminated the contract. I installed cameras. I changed my parking habits. I varied my schedule when I could. 2 weeks later, the sedan was gone. A moving truck came one afternoon while I slept. By the time I woke, the driveway stood empty. No hose, no water, no car. The house sold within a month. I still live nearby, but not on that street. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work. The driveways look the same. The lawns look the same. At 5:30 a.m., sprinklers tick on and off like normal. I understand now how little it takes for someone to step into your routine and make it theirs. No chase, no raised voice, just patience, access, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows more about you than they should. I moved into that neighborhood because it was the only place I could afford after my divorce. Late August 2016, a quiet suburban street outside Dayton, Ohio. Split-level houses with faded siding, trimmed lawns cut short every Saturday morning, mailboxes that leaned the same way after years of wind. It was the kind of street built for families that stayed put. I arrived alone with a borrowed pickup, a mattress, 2 boxes of clothes, and paperwork that said I owned half of nothing anymore. The house I rented sat slightly lower than the others, like it had settled and never corrected itself. From the front window, I could see straight across the street to a gray split level with dark shutters. The place looked empty. No trash cans ever rolled out. No cars in the driveway. The grass stayed cut, but not fresh, like someone paid for it without checking. The windows were always clean. That was the first thing I noticed the first night I slept there. I did not notice the lights until the second night. At exactly 9:40 p.m., the upstairs light turned on behind the front-facing window. At 11:15, it went off. At 5:50 a.m., a different light came on downstairs, dimmer, more yellow. At 6:30, it shut off. I noticed because my sleep was broken then. Divorce had done that. I woke for no reason and stared at the ceiling until patterns formed in the paint. When I rolled over, I saw the glow through my blinds and checked the clock. The pattern repeated the next night, and the one after that. I told myself routines existed everywhere. People worked early shifts. People used timers. That explanation held until I started noticing the shape behind the upstairs curtain. It was always there when the light was on. A dark outline, head and shoulders, centered in the window. It never moved across the room. It never stepped away. It stayed at the same height, the same distance from the glass. I assumed it was someone standing still or maybe a coat rack placed wrong. I tried not to stare, but once I saw it, it pulled my attention back every time. During the day, the house gave nothing away. No deliveries, no visitors, no sound. The street itself stayed normal. Kids rode bikes in the evening. Sprinklers ticked and hissed. Lawn mowers ran on rotation. I blended in without trying. I unpacked slowly. I cooked simple meals. I sat on the porch some nights with a cheap beer and watched cars pass. I noticed something else then. When I stepped outside after dark, the porch light across the street came on within seconds. It did not matter the time. It did not matter if the upstairs light was on or off. My movement triggered it. I tested it carefully. I stepped out, counted, and watched the bulb glow. I went back inside and waited. The light shut off after exactly 3 minutes. I stepped out again. Same result. That was when the house stopped feeling empty. I paid attention to small details after that. The mailbox flag never moved. The address numbers were newer than the rest of the place. The front door had been replaced recently, but the frame was old and scarred. The blinds never shifted. The curtains never changed. The silhouette remained fixed when present, always facing outward. I avoided looking directly for a few days. I focused on work and the routines I was trying to rebuild. I came home tired and stayed inside. Still, every night at 9:40 the light came on. At 11:15 it went off. The silhouette appeared and vanished with it. One night, close to 2 in the morning, I woke and felt watched without knowing why. My room was dark. The air felt still. I checked my phone and saw 2:14 a.m. I lay there, staring until the feeling sharpened. I got up and walked to the front door. I stood there for a full minute, hand on the knob, heart slow but heavy. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch at 2:17. My porch light clicked on automatically. Across the street, the upstairs light turned on at the same moment. The silhouette was already there. It leaned closer to the curtain. Not a step, not a shift of position, just a subtle change in distance, like a person bending at the waist. I felt my skin tighten. I stayed where I was and watched. The porch light across the street came on too. 3 minutes passed. It shut off. Mine stayed on longer, buzzing faintly. I went back inside and locked the door. After that night, I stopped pretending it was nothing. I paid attention to the timing with more care. The lights ran on precise schedules. The porch light activation responded to motion from my side of the street, not cars. Passing headlights did nothing. People walking dogs did nothing. My movement alone triggered it. That told me the sensor was angled carefully. I checked county property records online. The house was owned by a limited liability company formed out of state. No listed occupant. The purchase date was recent. I checked again weeks later. Nothing changed. I walked the street during the day and looked at the place from the sidewalk. The windows reflected cleanly. No dust, no cobwebs. The front door had a deadbolt and a keypad lock, newer than the handle. The basement windows were covered from the inside. The air smelled faintly of fresh mulch, even when no one else had it down. I began sleeping poorly. I felt watched even when I avoided the windows. I started keeping the blinds closed, then the curtains. That made the house feel smaller. Sounds carried differently at night. Every passing car sounded slower. Every footstep on my own stairs sounded heavier. One evening, I noticed a thin cable running from the gray house into the ground near the side yard. It was not power. It was data. It ran toward the back, buried shallow. That was when the explanation started to form piece by piece. I contacted the city anonymously and reported concerns about an unoccupied property with active utilities. An inspector came days later. I watched from my kitchen window as the truck parked in front. The inspector walked the perimeter, took photos, tried the door, and left. That night, the lights stayed off for the first time since I moved in. They returned the next day with another vehicle. Permits were pulled. The house was entered. The street stayed quiet, but the routine broke. The final answer came later through public records and a notice taped briefly to the door before it was removed. The house had been leased to a private security contractor hired by an insurance firm investigating staged thefts in the area. The house was used as a surveillance point. The silhouette was not a person standing still. It was a mannequin torso mounted behind the curtain to create the impression of occupancy. Cameras were installed throughout the house, aimed outward. Motion sensors were calibrated toward my porch and a few others. The lighting schedules were automated to mimic a human routine. The intent was to monitor patterns without drawing attention. My movement had been flagged because my schedule differed after the divorce. Late nights, irregular hours. That was enough to justify observation. Once the inspector visit happened, the operation shut down fast. Equipment was removed. The house went dark for good. A month later, a real family moved in. Cars filled the driveway. Curtains opened and closed at random. The porch light flicked on when anyone passed. The upstairs window showed nothing but shadows from a television. The feeling did not leave right away. It lingered in my chest for weeks. Even knowing the explanation, I slept with the blinds closed until winter. The street stayed quiet. Nothing else happened. But I never forgot how normal it all looked while I was being watched, or how easily a life reduced to patterns could be mistaken for something worth monitoring. We used to hang out in the alley because it was the one place the adults didn't look. Summer 2012 pressed down on the neighborhood like wet cloth. The air stayed warm even after midnight, trapped between brick walls and chain-link fences. The alley ran behind a row of attached houses in Queens, narrow enough that two people had to turn sideways to pass each other. The streetlights barely worked back there. One flickered, one stayed dark, one glowed dim and yellow like it was tired of trying. That darkness made it feel private. It made us feel unseen. I won't say which block it was. The houses were close enough that you could hear televisions through open windows, smell dinners you weren't invited to, hear arguments through bathroom fans. During the day, the alley filled with trash bags, cardboard, broken furniture. At night, it emptied. That's when we went there. We sat on overturned milk crates or leaned against dumpsters, passing time because there was nothing else to do. No phones worth staring at. No money to spend. Just heat, boredom, and the sense that summer could last forever. The first thing we noticed was the breathing. At first, it blended in with everything else. Traffic from a few blocks away, air conditioners rattling in windows, our own breathing after running around the block. But once you noticed it, you couldn't stop hearing it. It was slow and steady, not heavy, not strained, just there. The strange part was that it always seemed closest to whoever stood nearest to the center of the alley. If someone stepped forward, the sound shifted with them. If someone leaned back, it leaned back too. We assumed it was a person. Someone sleeping behind a dumpster. Someone hiding. Queens had plenty of people who didn't want to be seen. But the sound didn't match a sleeping body. It didn't change rhythm. It didn't snore. It didn't cough. It stayed in perfect time, like a metronome set to lungs. We tested it without talking about it. One of us would move closer to the dark end. The breathing would seem closer there. Another would move back toward the street, followed whoever was nearest. The sound never echoed. It never bounced. It felt local, contained, as if it belonged to the space right behind your shoulder. That was when the alley started to feel smaller. The walls were brick, stained black near the ground from decades of trash leaks. Fire escapes hung overhead like bent ribs. The ground was uneven, patched asphalt and old concrete, always sticky in places no matter how dry the weather was. There were rats sometimes, but rats moved fast. They scratched. They ran. The sound didn't move like that. Luis noticed it more than the rest of us. He had sharp instincts. He would stop mid-step and tilt his head, his shoulders tightening. He stopped leaning against the dumpster. He stood in the open where he could see both ends of the alley. He was the first to say we shouldn't stay long. Not scared words, just practical ones, like weather advice. One night, the breathing got closer than it ever had before. The alley was empty except for us. No bags, no loose cardboard. It felt stripped. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt close enough that it changed the air. My chest tightened in response, matching it without me trying. That was another thing. The sound pulled you into its rhythm. Your body wanted to sync with it. Luis moved suddenly, not running yet, just stepping away. The breathing stayed with him, perfectly timed. He took another step, then another. That's when he sprinted. He ran toward the street, shoes slapping the ground hard. We expected the sound to rush after him. That's what made our stomachs drop. It didn't speed up. The footsteps that followed stayed slow and even, like a person walking at a calm pace. Each step landed with the same spacing, the same weight. Not dragging, not rushing, just following. Those steps were real, not imagined. Solid contact with the ground. They stayed behind him, but they never fell back. They never closed the gap. They stayed the same distance away, as if distance didn't matter. Luis burst into the street and kept running. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the alley. The breathing faded, not away, but inward, like someone turning their face into their chest. We didn't laugh after that. We didn't explain it away. We left early and didn't look back. Still, we came back another night. Curiosity pulls harder than fear when you're young. We told ourselves it had been nothing. Person messing with us. Someone with a trick. Someone bored. But the alley felt different. Smaller. The shadows deeper. The dark end seemed longer, stretching farther back than it should have. That was when we saw the trash bag. It sat near the wall. A standard black bag. Full but not tied yet. It hadn't been there earlier. The plastic was split open from the top down. Not ripped. Peeled. The tear was long and clean, like careful hands had tested the contents without wanting to spill anything. The bag sagged open, trash visible inside, undisturbed except at the opening. Rat's tear from the bottom. Cat's claw sideways. Wind pulls loose edges. This was none of that. The plastic stretched before it split. You could see the stress lines. Finger width spacing along the tear. Faint impressions pressed into the plastic before it gave way. The breathing came back as we stood there. Close, calm, waiting. That was the last night we stayed. The explanation came later, pieced together slowly, from things we didn't want to connect at first. A man had lived 3 houses down, alone, quiet, always watching. He worked nights for years at a packaging warehouse until he was fired. After that, he stopped leaving much. Neighbors complained about smells, about trash moved around back, about someone standing too close in shared spaces. Police visits didn't lead anywhere. Nothing criminal enough. Nothing solid. The alley backed directly behind his property. A broken section of fence made access easy. The breathing matched his condition. Severe sleep apnea untreated, documented after an ambulance call months later. Loud, steady breathing. Mechanical. His gait was described the same way. Slow, even, unchanging no matter the situation. A spinal issue from an old injury limited his speed. He couldn't run, but he could walk for hours. He had been collecting trash, going through bags at night, not for food, for objects, clothing, anything with scent, anything recently handled. The careful tear made sense then. Testing, selecting, leaving the rest untouched to avoid attention. Luis was followed because he was closest. The sound stayed with whoever stood nearest because the man stood just out of sight, mirroring distance, matching pace, watching reactions. He stayed calm because panic made people slip. Panic made mistakes. The reason he never caught up was simple. He didn't need to. Fear did the work for him. The alley stopped feeling private after that. The lights were fixed within a year. Cameras went up. The broken fence was replaced. The man was eventually removed after being caught inside a building he didn't belong in, holding items that weren't his. No charges stuck that mattered. He disappeared from the block anyway. I still think about that breathing when summer nights get heavy. How easy it was to mistake a person for something else when you only experienced them in pieces. How the mind fills gaps with worse things than reality. The truth was enough. A man watching from the dark, patient, methodical, close enough to control the space without ever touching us. We didn't hang out in alleys after that. We learned that darkness doesn't need anything unreal to become dangerous. It just needs someone who understands how fear moves faster than feet. We moved there in 1999, when I was still young enough to believe adults knew what they were doing. The subdivision sat on the edge of Phoenix, where the desert had just been scraped flat and divided into lots. Everything looked new and empty at the same time. Beige stucco houses, beige gravel yards, beige sidewalks that glared white in the sun. Every house had the same shape, the same roofline, the same small square windows. That was why my parents liked it. Order felt safe to them. There were no trees yet. No shade except what the houses cast in the late afternoon. The air smelled like dust and concrete. During the day, the place looked normal. Kids rode bikes in circles. Lawns were still learning how to exist. Cars lined the streets in the evenings when people came home from work. Nothing stood out until the sun went down. That was when I noticed the windows. None of the houses had curtains. Not lace, not blinds, not sheets pinned up as placeholders. Every window was bare glass. First, I thought it was coincidence. New homes. People hadn't unpacked yet. But weeks passed. Months. Nothing changed. At night, every house was fully lit. Not warm lamp light, but overhead light, white and flat. You could see straight through living rooms, kitchens, hallways. There were no televisions on. No flicker. No moving shadows. Furniture stayed in place. Chairs never shifted. Tables stayed clear. What you could see were people. They stood inside their homes, alone or in pairs, facing walls, facing corners, facing door frames. They did not sit. They did not lie down. They did not look out the windows. Their posture stayed upright, arms at their sides or held loose in front of them. They stood close enough to the wall that their faces were almost touching it. I watched because I was a kid and there was nothing else to do. I watched because it felt wrong in a way I could not explain. I waited for someone to move, to turn, to scratch their head. They didn't. The lights stayed on for hours, sometimes all night. My parents noticed too. I could tell by the way my mother closed the blinds in the car when we drove past other houses. I could tell by how my father slowed the car when we turned onto our street, his eyes scanning windows instead of the road. During the day, the neighbors acted normal. They mowed their yards. They waved. They unloaded groceries. They wore work clothes and weekend clothes. Nothing about them suggested what they did at night. Our house stayed dark after bedtime. My parents did not like wasting electricity. That made us different. I realized that quickly. Our windows reflected darkness back at the street while every other house glowed. My bedroom faced the road. I started sleeping with my door closed. One night, my father decided to put up curtains. He bought them in bulk, plain beige to match the walls. He measured carefully. He drilled quietly. He worked with the seriousness he brought to everything. By evening, every window had curtains drawn. The house felt smaller, safer. I slept better. In the morning, the curtains were gone. They weren't ripped down. The rods were still in place. The screws were tight. The curtains themselves were folded neatly and placed on the kitchen table. Every fold sharp, every edge aligned. There was red dust on them, coated the hems and corners, fine and dry, like powder. It didn't match the dirt outside. Our yard soil was pale, almost gray. This dust was dark red, the color of dried clay. It smelled metallic. It left streaks on the table when my mother touched it. No doors were unlocked. No windows broken. Nothing else disturbed. My parents didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe they didn't want to be dramatic. Maybe they already understood something they didn't want to name. The curtains went into a closet. The rods stayed bare. After that, my father started driving the neighborhood at night. Slow loops, windows down. He wanted to see what everyone else saw. I sometimes went with him, sitting low in the passenger seat, pretending to sleep. The same thing happened every night. Lights on, people standing, no movement, no sound. The street felt hollow, like a display model with breathing mannequins. One evening, I noticed trucks parked at the far end of the subdivision. White utility trucks with no logos. They sat near a fenced lot that had been empty since we moved in. Red dirt covered the ground there, darker than anything else around. Floodlights pointed inward. The trucks were gone by morning. The dust on the curtains came from there. Over time, small details added up. The Homeowners Association newsletters arrived weekly instead of monthly. They were thick, full of rules about exterior lighting, interior lighting, window coverings. Most of it framed as safety and uniformity. Language about visibility and compliance. My parents argued in low voices at night. They talked about resale value, about contracts, about what they had signed without reading closely. I grew older. The standing continued. I learned to look without staring, to glance and move on, to pretend it was normal. Then one night, the lights went out. Every house went dark at the same time. The streetlights shut off. The floodlights at the fenced lot died. The silence felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. I looked out my window. For the first time since moving there, I couldn't see inside anyone's home. The lights came back on after a few minutes. The people were no longer standing. They were sitting. Some were on couches, some at tables, some on the floor. They looked disoriented. Some rubbed their faces. Some stared around as if waking up. The next day, moving trucks arrived. Not one or two, many. Neighbors packed quickly. No yard sales, no goodbyes. Houses emptied in days. The fenced lot was dismantled. The red dirt was hauled away. Fresh pale soil replaced it. Within a year, the subdivision changed. Curtains appeared. Televisions flickered. Lights turned off at night. We stayed long enough to see it settle into something normal. Years later, as an adult, I found the explanation by accident. A buried news article about a canceled government contract. A private firm testing residential lighting exposure and sleep deprivation effects on behavior. Volunteers recruited through housing incentives. Full disclosure buried in legal language. Mandatory participation clauses enforced by the Homeowners Association. Compliance checks conducted at night. Standing positions used to prevent sleep while minimizing movement. Red dust traced to a nearby testing range where materials were staged. My parents had not volunteered. They had bought into it without knowing. The curtains were removed to maintain uniform conditions. The folding was procedure. The dust was contamination control failure. The program ended after internal reports showed psychological harm. Nothing supernatural ever lived there. Just people trapped in an experiment and a child watching it happen through uncovered glass. I joined the neighborhood app a week after closing on my condo in early 2021. It felt like a practical step, the kind new owners were expected to take. The listing promised community updates, lost pets, construction notices, warnings about porch thefts. East Portland was still adjusting to the last year, quiet in a tense way, like everyone was listening for something to break. My building was 3 stories, wood frame, newer than most around it. 6 units total. Balconies faced a narrow side street lined with maples and parked cars. My unit sat on the second floor, 1 bedroom, sliding glass door in the living room, a narrow bedroom window that faced the alley behind the building. I liked the light. I liked the sense of openness. After months of renting places that felt temporary, I wanted to feel seen. The app felt harmless at first. A missing cat. A package taken from a porch 2 blocks away. Someone complaining about trash pickup. I skimmed it at night while cooking, barely reading. The first post that involved me didn't register as important. A blurry photo of a person walking toward a car, labeled suspicious activity, timestamped 6:12 a.m. The caption mentioned someone checking door handles. I recognized the jacket because it was mine. I recognized the car because it was parked in my assigned spot. I checked the date. That morning, I had left at 7:40. I always left at the same time. My phone confirmed it. The photo was posted at 6:30. I assumed it was a mistake. Someone saw a similar person. Someone guessed at a time. The app was full of bad guesses. Then another photo appeared 2 days later. Me on my balcony, leaning on the railing, scrolling my phone. The caption said loitering behavior, posted at 11:18 p.m. The photo showed daylight, late afternoon light, judging by the shadows. I remembered that moment. I had been waiting for a grocery delivery. The timestamp on my receipt showed 4:02 p.m. The comments below were clipped and vague. Warnings, reminders to stay alert. No one named me. No one asked who it was. The assumption was enough. I started checking the app more often. Posts appeared that felt out of sync with time. A person standing near the mailboxes at midnight, but the photo showed morning fog. A figure near the dumpsters at dawn. Shadows long and orange like sunset. Each time, the figure looked like me. Same build, same clothes, same posture. I changed clothes. I took different routes to my car. The photos kept coming. The one that broke the sense of distance came a week later. A post titled Unusual Activity. The image showed me asleep in bed. On my side, face turned toward the wall. One arm bent under the pillow. My bedroom window was visible in the frame, which meant the camera was inside the room. The angle was from the corner near the closet, elevated slightly, like someone holding a phone at chest height. The timestamp said 3:14 a.m. I checked my phone. I had been asleep. No movement recorded. No calls. No notifications. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor until the shaking stopped. I checked every window, every lock. Nothing was forced. Nothing missing. No sign anyone had been inside. The app post stayed up for hours before being removed by a moderator for violating privacy rules. That removal felt worse than the post. It meant someone else had seen it. I stopped sleeping well. I left lights on. I taped paper over the bedroom window at night. I felt watched even when the app was quiet. I contacted the building manager. He said nothing unusual had been reported. Cameras covered the entrances and the parking area, not individual units. He suggested I contact the app moderators. I did. I sent screenshots. I sent timestamps. I pointed out the inconsistencies. The response came back neutral and delayed, framed as concern but not urgency. They said posts relied on user submissions. They encouraged blocking accounts that made me uncomfortable. Blocking did nothing. The photos kept appearing, posted by different users, always vague, always cautious, always framed as community safety. I noticed something else then. The angles. The balcony photos were taken from the building across the alley, 3rd floor, far corner unit. The walking photos came from near the recycling area, where a security camera was mounted. The sleeping photo angle matched the ceiling corner exactly where the smoke detector sat. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small lens wired into the housing, no larger than a fingernail. It fed into the building's network line that ran through the walls. I checked the living room detector. Same thing. The bathroom. Same. I unplugged my router. I shut off power at the breaker. The app post stopped. I went to the city website and searched permits. The building had been renovated in 2019. A tech company had owned it briefly before selling the units individually. The company specialized in neighborhood safety software, community monitoring, predictive behavior mapping. They had installed hardware during renovation, not for tenants, for data. The app was not just social. It was a test platform. Users flagged behavior. The system pulled footage from installed devices and backfilled timestamps to match reports, training both the software and the users to see patterns where none existed. I had moved into a building designed to watch. The sleeping photo was a glitch, a misrouted feed posted publicly instead of flagged internally. It was removed because it exposed the system, not because it violated my privacy. I contacted a lawyer. Others in the city had similar stories, quieter ones, buried under tech language and settlements. The company dissolved. Assets transferred. Responsibility diffused. I sold the condo within 6 months. I lost money. I gained distance. I still think about how quickly neighbors learned to suspect without knowing why. How easily an app turned normal life into evidence. How being seen too clearly made me disappear from my own home. I do not join neighborhood apps anymore. I keep my curtains closed. I trust silence more than updates. We rented the house in June 2015 because it was cheap and close enough to Boulder that we could still pretend we were connected to something bigger. Four of us, fresh out of college, tired of dorms and parents and rules that came with both. The house sat just outside town, tucked into a small cul-de-sac that curved inward like a bowl. No streetlights stood at the center. The city had installed lights along the main road but skipped the circle, maybe to save money, maybe because someone forgot. At night, the middle of the cul-de-sac stayed dark in a way that felt deliberate. During the day, the place looked harmless. Split-level houses, gravel yards, a few young trees tied to stakes, the kind of neighborhood built fast and all at once. Night, it changed. Sound carried strangely. Wind slid along the pavement instead of lifting. The dark center felt deeper than it should have. The first night we heard it, we were sitting in the living room with the windows open. Summer heat clung to everything. Around midnight, a sound drifted in from outside. Not footsteps, not shoes on pavement. It sounded like fabric being pulled across concrete. Slow, even. A soft scrape that repeated at steady intervals. We went to the front window and looked out. Nothing stood there. The cul-de-sac was empty. The sound continued, moving in a circle. Always clockwise. It never crossed the center. It stayed near the curb, tracing the same path over and over. We watched until the sound faded somewhere behind the houses. We laughed it off. Someone walking a dog. Someone dragging trash. Someone moving patio furniture at a bad hour. The next night, it came back. Same time, same sound, same direction. This time, we opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The air felt cooler than it should have. The sound moved past our house, close enough that we could tell it wasn't coming from shoes. There was no heel strike, no lift, just a pull. Fabric against pavement. Something soft but heavy. We leaned out, trying to see. The darkness swallowed everything above knee height. Whatever moved stayed low. We could not see feet. We could not see legs. Just a shifting shadow near the ground that blended into the dark. Passed and continued around the circle. We started paying attention after that. Every night, someone walked the cul-de-sac. Always clockwise, never visible above the knees. The sound never changed. No coughing, no breathing, no phone glow, no pause. We tried waiting it out. Coffee, energy drinks, lights on. At exactly 1:12 a.m., every night the same thing happened. A weight dropped into our bodies. Eyes burned, muscles softened. Thoughts slowed. It felt chemical, not natural tiredness. Heavy and sudden like a switch thrown. The first time we blamed exhaustion. The second time we joked about it. The third time it scared us. We would be mid-sentence, focused, alert, and then everything blurred. Heads nodded. Limbs felt wrong. Took effort to stay upright. Within minutes, we were on couches or floors. Lights still on, windows open. Every morning, we woke to the same thing. The front door locked, the house unchanged, the street quiet. We checked the time on our phones. 1:12 a.m. showed as the last active moment. One night, we decided to mark the street. We bought a bag of flour and went out just before midnight. We scattered it in a thin layer along the curb, careful not to leave obvious footprints of our own. The white powder caught what little light there was, a pale ring around the dark center. We went back inside and waited. The sound came. The dragging fabric circled closer. We stayed awake longer this time, fear cutting through the heaviness. When 1:12 hit, the tiredness still came, but not all at once. I remember forcing my eyes open, watching the clock blur, hearing the scrape pass our house. In the morning, the flour was disturbed. There were no footprints, no shoe patterns, no steps. Instead, there were long impressions pressed deep into the powder and the asphalt beneath. Parallel marks close together with shallow grooves trailing behind them. It looked like something had knelt and pulled itself forward, over and over around the entire circle. The mark stayed low. Nothing rose higher than a foot off the ground. We took photos. We compared angles. We measured spacing. The impressions were evenly spaced, consistent in depth. Whatever made them moved with practiced control. We called the city. They said it was likely an animal. We knew it wasn't. The answer came from a place we hadn't looked. At the end of the cul-de-sac lived an older man who rarely came outside during the day. His house sat slightly lower than the rest, the driveway sloping down. We had seen him once or twice, thin, hunched, moving carefully with a cane. We assumed he kept to himself. One afternoon, a city worker knocked on our door asking questions about overnight disturbances. He mentioned concerns about a resident at the end of the street, a former textile worker who had suffered a spinal injury years earlier, partial paralysis, limited leg function, severe insomnia. He could not sleep lying down. He could not walk upright for long. He moved by kneeling and pulling himself forward, using heavy fabric pads sewn into his clothes to protect his knees and hands. The dragging sound was reinforced denim and canvas against pavement. He walked at night because pain medication made him drowsy and disoriented in daylight. The clockwise path was habit, drilled into him during physical therapy to avoid nerve strain. The exhaustion we felt had a cause too. A faulty vent in his house leaked sedative aerosol from a humidifier modified to deliver medication. At night, when temperatures dropped, the vapor hugged the ground and pooled in the cul-de-sac, thickest at the center where air did not circulate. It drifted into open windows, enough to dull alertness without knocking anyone out completely. The city shut it down quietly. The vent was repaired. The medication delivery stopped. The man was moved to assisted housing closer to town. The walking stopped. The flower marks faded with the next rain. We stayed another month, then moved out. Even now, I remember the sound more than the sight. Fabric dragged with purpose, slow and steady. A person adapting to a body that no longer worked the way it should, carving a path through darkness while the rest of us slept, unaware of how close he had been every night. We stayed with my cousin for a week in October 2013 because he had nowhere else to put us and because we wanted to see the part of West Virginia most people only pass through. He lived in a cabin set back from a county road, far enough that traffic noise never reached it. The trees were already thinning, leaves stuck halfway between green and brown, the air sharp enough to sting when you breathed too deep. Getting there was the first sign something was off. His street did not exist on GPS. The map ended at the county road, a thin gray line cutting through forest. You had to turn after a burned-out mailbox leaning toward a ditch, the metal blistered and black, the flag missing. The turn was easy to miss. No sign, no marker, just a gravel path that narrowed fast, swallowed by trees. The street was barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Houses sat unevenly along it, set back at different distances, all older, all weathered in the same way, with siding grayed by time, porches sagging slightly, smoke stains above chimneys. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a place that had grown inward, away from the rest of the world. Everyone on the street had the same last name except my cousin. I noticed it when mailboxes came into view, each one hand-painted, each one bearing the same name in fading black letters. It repeated over and over as we drove deeper in. My cousin's mailbox stood out because it was newer, metal, stamped letters instead of paint. He told us it had been that way before he moved in. The houses had belonged to the same extended family for generations. Land divided but never sold off. He was the first outsider to buy in. During the day, the street felt quiet but not empty. People worked in yards, wood chopped. Smoke drifted from chimneys even when it wasn't cold. Everyone watched us without staring. Heads turned. Movements paused. No one waved. At night, the street changed. People locked their doors before sunset. You could hear it if you paid attention. Deadbolts sliding, chains catching, screens closing. Lights stayed on inside, but curtains were drawn tight. The road itself vanished into shadow once the sun dipped below the ridge. No street lights, no porch lights left on outside. The first night, we heard something moving between houses. It stayed low to the ground, fast but silent. No footsteps, no brush breaking, just a sense of displacement, like air pushed aside quickly. The sound came and went without rhythm, weaving through yards, passing close to walls, then disappearing behind sheds. We went to the windows but saw nothing. The dark felt thick, layered. Tree shadows crossed the road like bars. The second night, it happened again. This time closer. Whatever moved stayed below the level of the porch railings. It crossed from one side of the street to the other without slowing. The dogs down the road went quiet as it passed, then started barking after it was gone. On the third day, I asked about it in a careful way, not naming what I thought it was. One woman, older than the rest, her face set deep with lines, explained it indirectly. She said the thing had once been a person, that it had moved upright before something changed. That was all. No details, no explanation of how or why, just the idea that it no longer moved the way people did. I did not press. The look on her face warned against it. My cousin avoided the topic. He stayed tense after dark, checking locks, keeping lights low. He said the street had rules. You learned them or you left. Sleep came in pieces. The cabin creaked as temperatures dropped. The smell of damp leaves seeped in through gaps in the frame. Around the same time each night, the movement started again. Always between houses, never on the road itself, as if the road was avoided. On the fourth night, I saw it. I was standing at the back window, looking toward the tree line, when something crossed the small clearing between two houses. It was fast, but my eyes caught the shape. Long close to the ground, moving on limbs bent at wrong angles for running. It did not reflect light. It absorbed it. It stopped briefly near a woodpile, then flowed forward again, dragging nothing, making no sound. It did not look toward the house. It knew where it was going. The next morning, I walked the length of the street in daylight. I noticed how close the houses were to each other, closer than zoning laws would normally allow. I noticed paths worn into the ground between yards, narrow and smooth, not made by feet. I noticed how the forest pressed in at the edges, reclaiming space. I also noticed old foundations deeper in the woods, stone outlines of structures that no longer stood. Places where houses had been before the street ended where it did now. The explanation came later, not from anyone there, but from research I did after we left. The street had once been longer. It had connected to a mining operation that shut down in the 70s. A small private company ran it, cutting corners, dumping waste improperly. When the mine closed, the company dissolved. The land stayed with the families who lived there. One of the waste pits had been poorly sealed. Chemicals leached into the groundwater over decades. Heavy metals, solvents, substances that affected the nervous system and musculoskeletal structure over time. Most people left. The ones who stayed adapted in ways that were not visible at first. Pain changed posture. Nerve damage changed movement. One man, according to old county records, lost the ability to walk upright but continued moving around the street at night to avoid being seen. Over time, his body learned new patterns. Fast, low, efficient. The families protected him. They adjusted their lives around him. They locked doors not out of fear, but habit. They warned outsiders in vague ways that would not bring attention. The street disappeared from satellite images a year later because the county requested it. Environmental litigation followed. Maps were updated to discourage traffic. The road was marked private, then removed entirely from public databases. My cousin moved out shortly after that. He sold the cabin back to one of the families. No listing, no inspection, just a transfer. I have not been back. I do not plan to be. What stayed with me was not the shape in the dark, but the way the place closed in on itself. A community shrinking to protect what it could not fix. A street learning to hide. The thing moving between houses was not a legend. It was a consequence, and it was faster than anyone expected because it had years to practice. I bought the house in 2008 because it was cheap and because the seller needed to move fast. That was the phrase the realtor used more than once. The paperwork showed nothing unusual. The inspection came back clean. The neighborhood sat in a quiet part of Minnesota. Older homes with wide yards and mature trees that bent under snow in winter. Felt stable. It felt like the kind of place where nothing followed you home. The house itself had been built in the early 60s. Solid frame, finished basement, a detached garage that smelled like oil and cold wood. The yard was large enough to feel private, bordered by aging chain-link fences on both sides. Mine ran straight and true, anchored by metal posts sunk deep into the soil. At least that was how it looked at the time. My neighbor to the north was Mr. Halvorsen. He had lived there longer than anyone else on the block. That much I learned early. His house sat back farther than the others, shaded by 2 old maples that dropped leaves year-round. His front yard stayed trimmed, but his backyard was empty in a way that felt intentional. No grill, no chairs, no garden, no shed, just packed dirt with thin grass struggling along the edges. After heavy rain, the ground back there would sink in places. Shallow dips that collected water, then dried and left cracks. I noticed because my basement stayed dry while his yard seemed to breathe, rising and falling with the seasons. Mr. Halvorsen himself kept to routine. Morning newspaper, evening walk to the mailbox. He wore the same jacket year-round, layered sweaters underneath. He watched more than he spoke. When he did speak, his voice stayed even, without inflection. One afternoon, a year after I moved in, I measured my fence line. I planned to replace the chain link with wood and wanted exact numbers before ordering materials. I stretched the tape along the property line, hammering small flags into the soil where posts would go. Mr. Halvorsen stood at the edge of his yard and watched. He didn't cross the line. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated in a calm tone that digging deep caused problems because the ground did not stay where you put it. At the time, I took it as an old man's comment. Experience passed down as warning. I nodded and kept working. I didn't dig that year. Life shifted. Money went elsewhere. The fence stayed as it was. Over the next 2 years, I noticed small things. The fence between our yards leaned slightly toward me, then straightened again after winter. The metal posts felt looser when I pushed on them. The ground near the fence line stayed soft longer after rain, even during dry summers. I told myself it was frost heave. Minnesota soil does that. It expands, contracts, it shifts. What bothered me was the pattern. The sinking patches in Mr. Halvorsen's yard never crossed fully into mine, but they crept closer. Each spring, the dips formed nearer the fence. Each fall, they filled and hardened again, leaving subtle changes behind. Then one day, while mowing, I realized my yard felt smaller. Not in a way you notice at once. The shed seemed closer to the fence. The tree I used as a reference point stood nearer than I remembered. I chalked it up to perception. Memory plays tricks when you look at the same space for years. I pulled out the old measurements I had written down. I remeasured from the house to the fence. The numbers did not match. The fence sat 6 inches inside what should have been my property line. I checked the survey from the purchase. I checked the county records. The boundary had not changed on paper, only on the ground. I assumed a mistake. Maybe the original fence had been placed wrong. Maybe I misremembered. I let it sit. Then the police came. It was early spring when they showed up, cars lining the street, officers moving with quiet focus. They knocked on doors, asking questions. I learned from another neighbor that they were searching Mr. Halvorsen's property. No one said why at first. The digging started that afternoon. Heavy equipment tore into the bare dirt of his backyard. The soil came up darker the deeper they went, damp and compacted. Officers marked spots with flags, working from old notes and maps. The sinking patches made sense then. The ground had been disturbed many times before. What they found stayed out of the news, but enough leaked through official channels to paint the picture. Mr. Halvorsen had buried things. Not just trash, not just animals. Objects tied to missing persons from decades earlier. Cases that had gone cold before computers linked patterns. The backyard had been used slowly, carefully, over years, always filled back in. always leveled just enough. The fence line mattered because it hid space. Each time the ground shifted or sank, he adjusted. He moved the fence inward, inches at a time, during winters when snow piled high and visibility dropped. New post holes placed where frost cracks already weakened the soil. Old posts pulled and reset, enough to claim more land without drawing attention. My yard had become part of his. The warning about digging made sense then. Digging would have exposed layers that did not belong together. Soil disturbed at different times. Fill that didn't match the rest. Evidence. The police removed the fence entirely. Surveyors staked the true line. 6 inches returned to me on paper and ground. Mr. Halvorsen was taken away quietly. No resistance. No spectacle. I replaced the fence that summer. The new posts went deeper, set in concrete. The ground held firm once it was no longer being worked from the other side. I sold the house 2 years later. I still think about how little it takes to lose ground without noticing. How space can be taken slowly, legally invisible until someone looks close enough. Mr. Halvorsen never needed my permission. He relied on patience, weather, and the fact that most people don't measure what they think is fixed. The house is still there. The yards look normal now. Grass grows thick where dirt once sank. But the soil remembers being moved. And so do I.